these other humans that we see all over the world. And so you get really all these different racial, the guys that collect all the skulls and say, look, clearly, the Caucasian, which that's an invented thing, right? What are they talking about? None of us are from the Caucasus Mountains. If you're, I don't even know what language they speak there. It's probably a stan. What does stan mean at the end of a Afghanistan? It means a place in various languages, basically. You're where, this is where you are, stan. It was a bias. It's clearly a bias that they adopted and imposed on everything. It looks almost like you can turn this kind of a bias into a fact. Another interesting example, more contemporary, was, and by the way, this is all referred to as, it's a dialectical process, so we're looking at this, but what we also get is the social construction of reality. This book is, I think, 1968, Peter Berger and Thomas Luckman. And it's dealing with this philosophical point of view that everything is phenomena. I mean, there are folks like, Husserl. I'll quick show you him. Husserl is a phenomenologist. What is that? So a phenomenologist is someone who says, okay, well, let's just study human experience. There's, 7,000 different languages. Each of those languages kind of frames human experience somewhat differently. There are trees of relationships between them, of course. We could trace that out and see how some languages are related to other ones. Frankly, when I hear people speaking Ukrainian, I think this is Russian to me. I realize that's a political issue because the Ukrainians are saying Ukraine is its own separate country. And I listen to them arguing about how they're speaking Ukrainian, and I think, well, but if I'm a Russian linguist, how come I'm understanding everything you're saying? Except when you're a female that talks really fast. That's true in English too. You talk with a woman that speaks really quickly, it's hard to know what the heck she's talking about. Do you ever speak really fast?
Yes.
That's genetic, I think.
Yeah,
Feminine
my parents speak really fast as well.
So, but in any case, so phenomenology, study of phenomena, but we also have power over it. That's the blessing of this whole philosophy, by the way, is that you've got to the point where you're no longer dominated by, the social world, because you realize how it works. And so you're like standing on this experience and saying, aha, the reason I would think this, or the reason this person would think this, is because of their social milieu, their background, how their peers, convince them to believe this stuff. I would be convinced to believe this stuff too, except now I've kind of stepped up above the whole game, and I'm looking at the game now, aware of how these pieces move. And I therefore have more power to choose for myself. I've been liberated by this educational experience. I can stand on top and I can understand that's why I would have wanted to do this. But do I have to do that? I can change my mind now, right? That's given me a whole nother ability, that I didn't have before. And by the way, this is why Nietzsche will talk about the Übermensch. Who is the Übermensch for Nietzsche? You are. Because you've gotten to the point now where you're no longer part of the herd. You're aware of what makes people tick, and as a result, you have your own individual freedom to decide for yourself how you want to tick, essentially, right? But how much control do you actually have? One of the things that we can look at as a result of the socially constructed if everything is socially constructed, theoretically, evolutionary ideas have changed the models of the way we view things. So we might have thought these people are possessed. Is it demonic? Why are they behaving this way? Well, then it became maybe they're ill. Maybe they're mentally ill. Maybe they're having some kind of a mental breakdown. It could be chemical. Let's give them chemicals and see what happens. Or William James, it's electric. They've got electricity now, and they can zap people, and you end up changing a person's personality by zapping them with volts. Wow, we're electric. Today, of course, we get into this big argument over whether or not mental illness is something that's caused by a chemical imbalance, and you should take chemicals to fix it, or is it a chemical imbalance that's caused by your environment, right? And you should change the environment, and that will change the chemical balance, right? So instead of having a family that's always fighting with one another, have a family gather as part of the treatment, and everybody all talk with one another with a professional that can help the family behave differently, and a lot of these problems might resolve in that situation, right? We don't need chemistry, to give somebody some kind of chemical that will literally dilute their emotional experience or change it, right? Instead, what we could do is change the environment by getting these people to talk with one another so that they're not beating one another up or harming one another and so on, right? I just saw someone who used to be treated chemically and then decided to wean herself off of that, and she has the self-control because of her understanding of things to realize, aha, the voices are coming back, but now I can control the voices, right? So she's not mentally ill anymore. She's in charge of herself, right? Another example of where this social construction of reality really impacted our culture was feminism. I think one of the main reasons that English-speaking societies are the ones where feminism really developed is because our language enabled it, because we have masculine, feminine, and neuter. And I think I've mentioned, everything in the room is neuter except for an actual person. So in a sense, we were liberated from the confinement of masculinity and femininity in our language. That's just me, and I've not read anyone to suggest that is a viable explanation for it. But in any case, we see feminism in the United States and England, for example. France has a little bit more of a difficulty with it. They have interesting, aspirations for women's liberation, but there's masculine dominance in French. And as a result, they don't even realize how powerful masculinity is in their way of thinking. But in English, we ended up with 3 waves so far. And I don't know why we haven't thought up another wave, because we've been a while since we had the 3rd wave. The first wave of feminism comes with John Stuart Mill, who we're going to look at today if I get off this and move on to what we're supposed to be doing, right? John Stuart Mill. And his wife Harriet Taylor are going to write about women, the rights of women, and so on. It's a British thing. Why on earth are we not educating women? Actually, there is education for women about this time. Emily Dickinson, if you get into her poetry, it's pretty neat. Women of her particular social status were given a scientific education, because the men were actually supposed to study the classics. So you actually have the women at that time being the ones that are most aware of the new scientific developments associated with Charles Darwin and evolution and biology, studying plants and so on. That's a woman's job. Imagine. So as you're looking at the first wave of feminism, it's giving women rights to own property. They didn't have it in the British world. It was always the male that had everything. And in fact, the oldest male, so even the younger males didn't have much opportunity. But also the vote. Women should have the vote. Whoa, that was extraordinary. But the first wave succeeded, and they ended up with the vote. That's pretty late. We're looking at what, 1917? 1918? Women get the right to vote. I didn't even have to finish this. So thinking 19 because of the 19th Amendment. You can see it's roughly in that same time period, women's suffrage. Really took a while before they actually get it done. 1920. Alaska, by the way, was one of the first states. So that's kind of neat. And of course, we were not a state until 1951. So that's actually pretty, you get the idea, it's pretty late. But so that was the first wave. The first wave succeeded in what they thought they were aiming at, and women had these rights. And then you ended up with the second wave, and the second wave was something I grew up with, where people were protesting because women wanted to live exactly the same kind of lives that they saw men living. There was the concept of the glass ceiling, right? We want to get through that. We want women to be CEOs. We want women to be president. We want, women to be able to live exactly the way men do. No limitation on them, right? This came up against a wall of reality. You're trying to think, well, if reality is socially constructed, we're the ones that have created this social image of femininity versus masculinity, right? And we can just change it. And that's what that second wave attempted to do, is just change it. And it was such a frustration for everyone involved because it just didn't change. Still hasn't. Even when certain things did change, it turned out that women, statistically, tended to be more like women than men. So even if they had the opportunity to be like men, they all went and became women instead. Well, not all of them, right? But you get the idea. There was something real that resisted our design to change the world to fit what we would like to be out there. So this socially constructed reality, and that's why I would recommend this short little book. It's only, I think, like 198, 200 pages, something like that. And you literally end up discovering, well, why is, the knowledge of reality an issue? Well, this is really that whole history that we've gone through up to this point, right? We come to realize, hey, you can't really know facts per se. Facts are actually sociological, you know. We all agree. We all speak this language. We all say this kind of stuff. And we think these things are true. By the way, science is actively trying to change all of that. That's their job, right? To find out what's wrong with this. But at the same time, you're looking at what we used to think of as a fact as now dependent on the social milieu. What we agree is a fact tends to be a fact. And by the way, Hegel points out that you end up with this dialectical process between different groups who believe in different things. Just as I have this conflict between two people over what's going on in this conversation, there's different groups that believe different things. They have different facts. Notice we have that has really come to the fore in our own political environment right now. It seems, you've got fake facts. What do you mean fake facts? Well, I don't believe those facts, and I believe these facts are facts and not fake. Well, it seems like some fake facts are clearly fake. Yet on the other hand, when you have groups that believe, okay, we've been taken over by FDR since 1932, and we've decided that government owes all the people in a society a living, ought to be able to share the wealth so we can tax the rich and share it with everyone else through different agencies and so on. That's a particular political view. The other political view is the view that this is more of a evolutionary dog-eat-dog world, and you're stealing from other people to give that money to others that haven't earned it themselves. And that's immoral for you to do. You should let other people, the individuals that dominate, just continue to dominate. That's the way nature really works. Lions don't change their mind about eating other animals and start eating vegetables, right? No, there's a problem there. So when we look at what's right with regard to our moral point of view about helping other people, you got folks out there like Malthus who notices just about into this same milieu, 1798, right? Principle of population, that we can feed only so many people, and people end up growing more people faster than we could feed them. So every once in a while we go through this Malthusian catastrophe that takes place either as war, fighting over resources, or as plagues, because people can't get enough food to keep themselves healthy, or there's famine, disease, Malthusian catastrophes, right? It's just nature. That's the way evolution works. Survival of the fittest. Not everybody's going to survive. And by the way, if the group that's doing the best decides that they're going to share with everyone else, that could be the end of them. They're no longer going to be able to compete. So there's this traditional Christian moral view that everyone ought to help other people. Although keep in mind that the focus for the Christian view is the soul, and the body is an impediment to the success of the soul. If you get too attached to physical things, that hurts your soul. So the full able-bodied Christian response to things was, screw the body. It's the soul that you have to worry about. Starve yourself. You know, all these saints, literally, were saints because they did the most horrific things to themselves to enable their souls to dominate over their physical being. Not eating, beating themselves. And encouraging other people to do the same thing. Yeah, you see that, you know, the whipping. Let's all walk down the street together, whipping ourselves and making a bloody mess. Yes, that happens. So many of our